France may have been the scene of some of the earliest car races, but it had to wait for 36 years after the World Championship was first established before a Frenchman won it. And it was this man, Alain Prost, who brought them that longed-for title. Prost was born in 1955 in Saint-Chamond, deep in the heart of France. His mother was of Armenian extraction and his father was a small manufacturer of metal furniture. But their son brought France the title for which they had waited so long and so eagerly. But better still, far from being content with that one title, Alain Prost has gone on to establish a record in the sport which makes him one of the all-time greats. Prost, of course, is an anagram of sport. Was he destined to become a champion?
J'avais tenté de faire la maîtrise d'éducation physique. J'avais été au Krebs à l'INF Vichy là, pour être footballeur. Bon, j'ai eu un problème de genou. J'ai raté la maîtrise d'éducation physique pour pas grand-chose. Donc, à la limite, je l'aurais réussi à cette époque-là. Puis c'était une année avant. Je serais maintenant en survêtement Adidas avec les tongs devant ma télévision. Je serais prof de gym, peut-être, je sais pas. La vie, elle a basculé complètement. Mais j'avais tellement envie d'essayer en tout cas, compte tenu que j'étais vraiment performant en karting. Donc j'ai établi à ce moment-là un plan de travail.
And that plan of action became the optimal career. After winning his first international title in junior karting in 1972, he won the ELF scholarship at the end of 1975, then won the French Formula Renault Championships in 76 and 77, followed by victory in the European and French Formula 3 Championships the following 2 years. Prost thoroughly exploited the graduation program that had been established in France in the 70s. However, he needed to do more than just be carried along by the program, however good a foundation it may have been.
La filière, moi je crois que c'est la filière gagnante, c'est-à-dire qu'il faut gagner, il faut être là, il faut être au top. Et puis, mais il y a beaucoup de circonstances favorables ou défavorables qui décident plus ou moins du sort d'un pilote.
That's how Prost found himself behind the wheel of a Formula One car in only his 5th season of motor racing and scored his first World Championship point in his first Grand Prix, Argentina in 1980, driving a McLaren Ford. Right away, he immediately proved to have an exceptional talent at setting up a car, certainly on a par with his more experienced teammate, John Watson. And Renault welcomed him with open arms the following year, giving him the opportunity to attain instant hero status at the time. Yet, in spite of being burdened with this responsibility, Prost displayed remarkable maturity. He instantly established himself as the undisputed leader of the Renault ELF team and scored his first Grand Prix win in France in 1981. And as well as remarkable talent behind the wheel, he proved to be utterly ruthless in his determination to make progress, certainly a strong point.
Je crois qu'il y a quand même une bonne partie de dons au départ. Et puis après, c'est beaucoup de travail, du travail je dirais, de recherche, pas simplement sur le plan du pilotage. Je pense que le pilotage s'affine au fil des années. C'est l'expérience, c'est le fait de rouler beaucoup avec des voitures différentes, des puissances différentes, des pneus différents. Mais c'est un travail de longue haleine, je dirais, au niveau de tout ce qu'on peut apprendre sur la voiture elle-même, sur les rapports humains. Parce que ça, c'est très important, les rapports du pilote à son mécanicien, du pilote à l'ingénieur, du pilote au directeur d'écurie, ou même avec les sponsors, avec les gens de la télévision, avec les médias. Et donc je crois que c'est un travail de longue haleine qui fait que, bon, il y a des hauts, des bas, et puis il y a un certain moment dans la carrière où, bon, tout baigne dans l'huile.
So Prost and Renault flourished together. But it was a journey that was riddled with pitfalls, which at times interrupted and upset a progressive route that until then had been quite straightforward. But it revealed a trait in Prost's character which hadn't been apparent until then. He proved to be a very bad loser. His relationship with his teammate, as well as his basic popularity, would suffer.
Au bout de, je dirais, d'1 an, 2 ans de Formule 1, je crois qu'il y a un cap que tout le monde passe. C'est-à-dire qu'on est attiré un petit peu par la gloire, par l'argent. Et ça, c'est même pas la volonté du pilote en lui-même, c'est le fait que automatiquement il y a des convoitises, il y a les enchères, les transferts. Donc alors on est convoité, on est une valeur marchande, donc on essaye d'en profiter. Automatiquement, ça, je dirais que ça dérègle un petit peu. On en perd peut-être un petit peu d'ailleurs la notion principale, c'est-à-dire pour la raison pour laquelle on a couru la première fois, c'est-à-dire la passion. On est un petit peu attiré par l'appât du gain, par la gloire. La gloire c'est autre chose parce que la gloire, on sait que la gloire vient automatiquement en gagnant, donc quand même être raisonnable. On ne peut pas aller par exemple dans une équipe qui vous propose beaucoup d'argent et qui n'est pas compétitive, ça n'existe pas. Mais c'est vrai que je crois qu'on perd un petit peu le fil pendant quelques temps. Et puis après, ça revient, parce que malgré tout, ce qui compte, c'est de se faire plaisir.
Prost succeeded in overcoming the first difficult stage of his career without too much hindrance, and then went from success to success with Renault during the 82 and 83 seasons, where he confirmed that he had what it takes to be world champion. But he was pipped to the post the first time he looked likely to take the title by Piquet in what are sometimes thought of as slightly dubious circumstances. The Prost-Renault partnership didn't survive this frustrating setback. The divorce was unpleasant and sad. The driver bitterly and publicly blamed his team, which in turn violently rejected his allegations.
Pour moi, c'est complètement un sport d'équipe. Mais c'est évident que ça devient un sport individuel dans la mesure où on est deux. C'est-à-dire qu'on est deux pilotes dans une équipe. Si vraiment il n'y avait qu'un pilote dans une équipe, on ne parlera même pas de sport individuel. L'individualité, elle rentre en ligne de compte uniquement parce qu'on est deux pilotes dans la même équipe et que malgré tout, l'adversaire le plus représentatif pour un pilote par rapport à un autre, c'est son coéquipier, il a la même voiture.
Ron Dennis, the hard-headed team patron of McLaren, had long wanted Prost to drive for him, and in 1984 he jumped at the chance of signing him alongside double world champion Niki Lauda. Prost blossomed in McLaren's super-professional environment, where he found the kind of perfection that he craved. Now he could glean intimate knowledge as to how to win the World Championship from a teammate who had twice won it, and who was the very model of discipline. He reached his ultimate goal on October the 6th, 1985, after the European Grand Prix at Brands Hatch, winning his first World Championship title. There was no element of luck. It had been won by the best driver at the time, in the best car in the field.
La chance existe une fois que l'homme et la machine ont fait leur travail. Mais vous ne gagnez jamais une course grâce à la chance. Si vous la gagnez, c'est peut-être parce que les autres en ont eu un petit peu moins que vous, ou ils ont eu des problèmes, ou leur voiture n'était pas aussi bien préparée, etc. Mais vous ne gagnez jamais une course grâce à la chance. Mais de temps en temps, je pense qu'entre deux pilotes, ou entre deux équipes, sur l'ensemble pas d'une course, sur l'ensemble d'une saison, sur l'ensemble d'une carrière, il y a des pilotes un petit peu plus chanceux, c'est vrai, qui ont un petit peu plus de réussite. Mais ça compte très peu.
But then, every now and then, a tiny bit of good fortune can make all the difference. Prost benefited from it the next season, when he came out the winner from the ruthless rivalry which grew between Piquet and Mansell within the Williams Honda team, which allowed him to pit them both to the World Championship. In 1986, the McLaren tag Porsches were relatively powerless against the Anglo-Japanese cars, but Williams' two drivers shared the points, and Prost was still in with a chance in the final race of the season. The unlucky Mansell virtually had the title in his pocket, but then fate took a hand. He suffered a tyre failure on the Adelaide Straight. And Prost won the title. He had every right to be thrilled. Against all odds, he had gained a success which might well have been denied him by the inferiority of his equipment, yet which came within his grasp thanks to the indiscipline of his rivals. He was at the peak of his sport. Fastidious, Prost leaves nothing to chance, and he analyses everything very clearly.
Le moment le plus difficile pour moi dans le week-end, c'est plus avant la première séance d'essai. Parce que là, il y a une certaine nervosité, on ne sait pas si la voiture va être bien, va être compétitive sur le circuit lui-même. et puis surtout avant les qualifications. Je reconnais que dans cet exercice-là, je suis peut-être un petit peu plus faible parce que d'abord, une prise de risque beaucoup moins importante. Sur un tour, bon, j'ai toujours utilisé les pneus de qualification moins bien que certains autres pilotes parce que ça dépend du style de conduite. J'ai tendance à moins user les pneus, d'ailleurs en course, donc c'est un avantage, mais en qualification, j'arrive moins à les faire chauffer, notamment les pneus avant. Donc j'ai toujours les pneus arrière qui arrivent en température avant les pneus avant, donc un phénomène de sous-virage, je pousse les roues avant. C'est évident que c'est pour moi un handicap très très important.
This reluctance to reach his limit became more obvious when Senna became Prost's teammate at McLaren in 1988 and then frequently beat him in qualifying. Clearly, Prost no longer liked to take a risk that he couldn't calculate precisely. At the same time, the impetuous talent of the young Brazilian also revealed Prost's aversion to rain.
Les gens qui aiment la pluie, c'est parce qu'un jour, un pilote a peut-être une voiture idéale sous la pluie, il a gagné une course sous la pluie. Et là, après, pendant 6 mois ou 1 an, c'est le roi de la pluie, il dit « j'aime la pluie ». Et en réalité, le jour où il aura une voiture beaucoup moins compétitive, ou alors il va faire un tête à queue à 300 à l'heure dans la ligne droite, il va dire « oh là là, la pluie c'est dangereux, j'aime pas la pluie ». Moi, je peux courir sous la pluie, j'ai fait de très belles courses sous la pluie, j'en ai gagné sous la pluie, mais j'aime pas parce que je trouve que ça dénature la course automobile, c'est pas bien pour le spectacle et c'est très dangereux.
Prost, however, has the courage of his convictions when he's sure that he's right. That's to his credit, because it's not easy when you have no support. That was the unfortunate situation which occurred during the notorious 1989 Australian Grand Prix. Prost was under a lot of pressure, but he considered the track to be dangerous due to its poor drainage. Consequently, he tried to persuade other drivers that the start should be delayed. But the obstinate Senna refused to agree, and in the end, one after another, the rest were persuaded to start by the race officials. Prost also started, but after a hazardous tussle with Senna, decided to quit after 1 token lap as a protest. As far as he was concerned, it wasn't sufficiently safe. As there was little to prove, he felt no compunction to carry on, in spite of risking criticism from his team and the public. But in fact, he had every reason to quit. Visibility was almost non-existent, the track was flooded, and the next 2 hours proved him right. There were at least a dozen accidents, and it was a miracle that no one was hurt. But Prost was still the one who was judged to be wrong, and it's something that has been repeated many times in similar circumstances where his hasn't always been the easiest of roles. It's given him a reputation of being a moaner and groaner, and that annoys him.
Je pense que la majorité des sportifs n'ont pas leur vraie image au travers des médias. Pour moi, c'est nul de dire tiens, ce sportif a une image d'un gars sérieux, tout ça, celui-là a l'image d'un gars qui sort en boîte de nuit et qui s'amuse et tout ça. Je trouve que c'est dommage parce que ça peut changer. Je pense que si j'avais vraiment une image ou si j'étais catalogué comme quelqu'un de comme ci ou comme ça, ce serait vraiment dommage. Parce que je crois que depuis 72, j'ai beaucoup changé, beaucoup évolué et à mon avis, c'est pas fini. Et j'ai horreur du mot image et étiquette.
Prost's relationship with the media is ambiguous. Misunderstood, he finds himself disliked.
On regarde une certaine partie de la presse, moi j'ai pas peur de dire que c'est un manque de professionnalisme absolument évident. Et je trouve que c'est assez énervant au bout de 10 ans, 11 ans de Formule 1 de voir ça, quoi. Alors on en prend un petit peu par-ci, un petit peu par-là, puis au bout du compte, ça fait un certain ras-le-bol. Et plutôt que d'exploser, d'éclater, de dire voilà, j'en ai ras-le-bol, j'arrête, moi je me complais dans mon petit univers, et puis voilà, et je continue à faire ce qui me plaît, c'est-à-dire conduire ma voiture, c'est tout. Le public italien est très bon parce qu'il a un côté complètement passionné, il est très chauvin, c'est-à-dire c'est Ferrari qui compte en premier. Il peut y avoir le meilleur pilote italien du monde sur une autre voiture, ils soutiendront toujours Ferrari. Ça, je trouve ça super parce qu'ils sont quand même comme ça, et ils sont surtout 200 000 sur un Grand Prix.
Prost's need for recognition and adulation almost certainly had some influence on his decision to join Ferrari in 1990, combined with the fact that he had been usurped as team leader at McLaren by Senna, and it was a comforting way of warding off his relatively cool reception from the French public. But the Prost Ferrari extravaganza, which opened dramatically full of hope and enthusiasm, sadly closed less than 2 years later. To begin with, however, it was love at first sight and surprise. Instead of this Scuderia becoming more anglicised under the influence of the former McLaren driver, it was Prost who became more Italian. Proof of that was his emotion at winning his first Grand Prix for Ferrari in Brazil. A few weeks later in Mexico, Prost scored one of his most impressive victories, even though he started only 13th on the grid.
J'ai vraiment d'abord très bien réglé ma voiture. Je pense que j'ai bien potassé la voiture pour la course. Et en fonction de ça, j'ai fait une course d'attaque et tactique, parce que l'attaque, il fallait bien entendu doubler, et tactique, c'est évident que quand on est comme ça dans une position de 13e sur la grille, on a tendance à attaquer comme un fou au début, mais même si on passe quelques voitures, souvent les pneus ça ne résistent pas, la mécanique, tout ça. Il a fallu être très très patient.
A new chapter in Prost's career opened with the 90s. Would the champion of the 80s win his gamble by bringing the title back to Italy after more than a decade of disappointment? Would he be able to erase the feeling of humiliation felt after his untimely departure from McLaren and reverse the struggle with Senna in his favour? In spite of Ferrari's poor reputation for political intrigue, the team seemed to fulfill Prost's hopes and ambitions at first. They won races together. Prost was idolised by the Italian tifosi as Ferrari's new messiah for leading their favourite team back to the forefront of the sport. Prost discovered the pluses and minuses of this very passionate relationship.
On n'est jamais content dans la vie. Hein. Quand on n'est pas connu, on voudrait être connu, on voudrait réussir. Une fois qu'on est connu, on voudrait passer incognito, on voudrait être tranquille partout. Et bon, c'est une question il faut être réaliste. Et puis, j'estime tout à fait normal que les gens me demandent des autographes à partir du moment où ils sont polis, où ils sont gentils, où ils ne pensent pas que je leur appartiens complètement. Et je crois qu'il n'y a aucun problème. Le jour où on me demandera plus d'autographes, c'est Jacques Stewart qui avait dit ça une fois, j'avais trouvé ça super. En signant un autographe, on lui dit « Oh, ça doit vous embêter », c'est dire ce qu'on nous dit souvent. Et Stewart avait répondu « Vous savez, le jour où on m'en demandera plus, ça m'embêtera encore plus ». Et je crois que c'est vrai, parce qu'une fois qu'on y est, ça va être très très dur de redescendre. Alors je crois que maintenant il faut en profiter le plus longtemps possible.
Prost is also sensitive when it comes to his racing car, even though it may not attract the same personal affection that it does from some drivers.
Quand j'arrive le matin, de toute façon, la première chose que je fais, c'est voir ma voiture. Je sais que, par exemple, mes mécaniciens n'ont rien changé si je ne sais pas, si je ne suis pas au courant. Mais ne serait-ce que voir la carrosserie propre, les roues bien nettoyées, etc. La voiture qui était complètement démontée la veille, puisqu'on démonte tout le temps les voitures, on change beaucoup de choses dessus. De la voir remontée comme ça, propre, prête à partir, j'ai qu'une envie, c'est de monter dedans. Et à chaque fois que je monte dans ma voiture, ça peut être pendant une semaine d'affilée, tous les jours, j'ai toujours beaucoup de plaisir. Et on a une relation un petit peu bizarre ensemble, mais pour moi, c'est un bijou.
But Prost was unable to conduct his professional life as well as his car. To win in 1990, he needed the undivided support of his team. So once again, after Arnoux at Renault and Senna at McLaren, he came into conflict with his teammate. Mansell took his revenge, feeling that Prost had exploited the team's engineers at his expense and reduced him to a humiliating supporting role. So instead of helping his teammate to win the title, he seized the opportunity at Estoril to rob his teammate of a victory vital to his World Championship aspirations. Mortified, Prost launched into a diatribe against his team manager's professional capabilities. This was the first hiccup in the Prost-Ferrari romance. Prost finally lost the 1990 championship when a determined Senna dispatched him into the sand at Suzuka, a sad tale of revenge which did Formula One's image little good. In 1991, Prost had everything on his side, armed with the previous year's experience and free of Mansell. Unfortunately, this time it was his equipment which let him down. The Ferraris were no longer competitive. Typically, the mechanical crisis launched an internal war. Prost won the first battle by managing to have team manager Cesare Fiorio dismissed. But it was too late to turn the situation around. Prost tried to keep his spirits up, but his sad expression and disillusioned tone revealed his true feelings. Only winning satisfied him.
Le plaisir du pilotage, il est toujours là. Ça, c'est à part. C'est le jour où il est plus là que tu dois arrêter. Par contre, le plaisir, il est toujours de travailler avec l'équipe. Le côté technique, enfin, la technologie m'intéresse énormément. D'avoir connu énormément de choses, enfin, sur le plan technique, au niveau moteur, au niveau châssis. D'avoir toujours, justement, c'est ça qui fait l'intérêt de la F1, c'est que tu sais qu'il y a toujours une technologie nouvelle qui arrive, toujours progresser, quoi, à tous les niveaux. Et puis toujours l'espoir, quoi. Toujours l'espoir. Là, ça marche pas très bien, mais d'arranger les choses, d'avoir une voiture qui redeviendra compétitive très tôt, tu vois. Donc et puis malgré tout, c'est un challenge super de travailler dans une équipe comme ça, même si elle est dans la panade pour l'instant, mais d'essayer de...
Est-ce qu'elle est dans la panade?
Ouais.
But one day, tired of diplomacy, Prost cracked. He called his Ferrari a truck. This was too much for the wounded pride of a team that was already humiliated and frustrated, who sacked him like some errant machinist and replaced him before the end of the season. As at Renault, then at McLaren, the partnership with Ferrari ended badly, perhaps the worst. But this time, Prost was unable to find a suitable drive, and the three-time world champion, with an unrivaled record but a disputed personality, found himself in involuntary retirement for 1992. Was it temporary or permanent retirement?
J'ai toujours un but de toute façon, et ça change. Ce qui veut dire que j'essaie toujours d'avoir une motivation différente et supplémentaire. Mon but, c'était de faire de la Formule 1, je l'ai fait. Parce qu'on ne peut pas dire je veux être champion du monde au début, quand on est jeune. Quand je faisais du karting, je voulais faire de la Formule 3. Quand j'ai fait de la Formule 3, je voulais faire de la Formule 1. Bon, j'ai toujours eu des buts comme ça. Une fois que j'ai fait de la Formule 1, je voulais être champion du monde, bien sûr. Mais 5 fois champion du monde, c'est pas réaliste. Parce que la Formule 1 moderne est très très difficile, beaucoup plus difficile, je crois, qu'avant. Et les 5 titres de fin de jour, je pense que c'est exceptionnel. C'est à une autre époque que je ne veux pas comparer, parce que les gens ont toujours tendance à vouloir comparer les deux époques, alors que je pense que c'est complètement impossible. Donc 5 fois, ça représente beaucoup de choses, et c'est beaucoup trop loin pour y penser.
But Prost, whatever he says, does think hard about this record. That's because he's still hungry for glory, and statistics are his failing. That's why he's put himself into a situation whereby he can equal the record, if not beat it. It was with this in mind that during his sabbatical year, he astutely negotiated for his return in 1993, succeeding in pulling off a master stroke, that of taking the place of the leader of the #1 team of the moment. There's no doubt that no other champion in the whole history of motorsport has better conducted his races and his career. The Professor certainly deserves his nickname. The competition that is motor racing is fought on many fronts, but it is the human rivalries which become legends within the sport. When two great drivers of comparable talent line up against one another, it is then that races become fascinating. Often, however, it is the machine which makes the difference. But sometimes a driver's panache, his talent or cunning, finally decides the outcome of an event. The greatest two drivers of the 30s were both Italian. One was Achille Varzi, the other Tazio Nuvolari. Both graduated from motorcycle racing, but apart from that, they had little in common. Tall, elegant and from a good family, Varzi, although looking like a wealthy amateur, was utterly professional. On the track, he was a stylist, choosing corner lines with the utmost precision. He was the epitome of the great sportsman. Nuvolari came from a more humble background. He was small and wore an almost pained expression, but he had that lean and hungry look with a prominent chin, and it characterized his intense determination. He was the stuff of which heroes are made. While Varzi's driving was admired for its classic origins, Nuvolari invented his own technique. He would throw the car into a corner, entering almost too fast and drifting through in a full-blooded slide. In spite of their rivalry, however, the two drivers respected one another and the competition between them was always highly chivalrous. One day, Nuvolari insisted that Ferrari give Varzi, who didn't have a drive at the time, the same car that he, Nuvolari, had. He wanted to win, yes, but not a hollow victory. And he frequently beat rivals who were much better equipped than he was, including the German cars, in spite of having much less power. But the two Italians had their own personal problems too. Varzi, addicted to morphine, was thrown out of the Auto Union team. He managed to beat his addiction before being killed in practice for the 1948 Swiss Grand Prix. At that time, drivers wore only linen helmets. It was because of his death that hard helmets subsequently became obligatory. Nuvolari suffered hemorrhaging of the lung and would often finish a race covered in blood. But that didn't seem to affect him drastically, and he raced until he was over 50. His illness only overcame him after he had retired. The 50s were dominated by two drivers, Fangio and Moss. The first was already almost 40 when he began racing in Europe. Physically, he looked nothing special. On the short side, he was scarcely thin, although his hair was. He spoke in a high-pitched voice, which made him sound slightly as though he was in pain. But you only needed a flash of those pale, steely eyes to realize that the look, aristocratic and imperial, was that of a bird of prey. He was the protege of the Argentine dictator Perón, and as a Latin, easily fitted in with the changeable Italian scene. Moss was a lot younger when he entered Formula One, and his rise coincided with that of the British teams. Sadly for him, however, he never enjoyed the same success, for his career was prematurely cut short by a serious accident in 1962. Consequently, Moss was never world champion, whereas Fangio won the title 5 times. But this imbalance in the share-out of glory hides the fact that Moss was considered virtually as Fangio's equal. It wasn't by chance that he was hired to join the maestro at Mercedes. The team's autocratic but wily manager, Alfred Neubauer, simply wanted to hire the best two drivers in the world to assure his team's success. In their identical silver arrows, Fangio and Moss dominated drivers in the outclassed Italian teams. The inter-team duel again gives the impression that it was dominated by Fangio. 6 victories and the title again against Moss's single victory. But the Englishman never resented the success of the man who ostensibly cost him the chance of a world title.
I was very happy. I had to respect for Fangio. I was very happy to sit right behind him. We were called the train because I'd follow about 1 metre away and let him take me through until we had half a minute, and then I'd say, well, that's all right, I'll be second. I mean, so I don't know. And the British Grand Prix, which I did win, even to this day, I don't know if he let me win or not, because when I asked him, he says, don't be ridiculous, it was your day, you were on form, and so, I don't know.
So, in the case of Moss's victory at Aintree, one will never know if Fangio really tried to win the race or if he generously allowed his teammate the satisfaction of winning in front of his home crowd, in the belief that he richly deserved it. His behaviour has never suggested to Moss or anyone else that he let Moss win. Whatever the answer, this intrigue itself clearly illustrates the rapport that existed between the two men. It was founded partially on their immense mutual respect, but also on the fact that when they were teammates at Mercedes, they both had an acute sense of their responsibilities to the team for whom they drove, so that they set their rivalry aside in the interests of their employer. They both knew the correct way to handle themselves.
Teníamos coches para ganar. Y si nosotros corríamos entre los dos, podía ganar un tercero. Entonces la decisión fue que la carrera era libre, ¿sí? Hasta que nosotros teníamos una ventaja. En ese momento, el que estaba adelante, seguía adelante. El que estaba segundo, seguía segundo. Así que era una carrera distinta, pero fue un pacto. Diríamos que la única solución cuando hay dos coches de la misma marca que son superiores, la única forma sería esa. Y esa fue la que adaptamos en Mercedes.
The automatic regime of self-discipline to which Moss and Fangio adhered was not one that came easily to others. Without it, rivalry eventually led to tragedy. This was particularly the case at Ferrari in the early 80s.
De toute façon, ils se foutent tous carrément de nous. La preuve, ce matin, je viens d'arriver au circuit. J'ai dû me garer environ 2 km d'ici et marcher pendant à peu près une demi-heure après m'être battu avec 5 ou 6 policiers pour essayer de rentrer sur le circuit. Et puis, même Barnum, dans son cirque, traite mieux ses animaux qu'on est traité pour rentrer au circuit.
That was Gilles Villeneuve, an impulsive French-Canadian, honest and loyal almost to the point of naivety. He was a knight, brave and without reproach. He looked rather like an elf, stuck in perpetual adolescence, but he was a driver with panache and a generosity of style which he took to the very limit. His teammate for the 81-82 seasons was Didier Pironi, recently hired by Ferrari. Unlike Villeneuve, who emerged via the unlikely route of snowmobile racing, Pironi was a purebred product of the ELF scholarship system, a scheme established by the petrol company to generate an eventual French world champion for the first time. Although Didier was a lot more astute in his temperament, he flirted with risk like Villeneuve. The pair of them joked together, wound one another up, and seemed to get on well. But while Gilles was naturally carefree, Didier took a more considered approach. His education had taught him early in life that a career should be founded on methodical organisation, and he would reveal his exceptionally strong character by leading the 1982 drivers' strike at Kyalami.
C'est la première fois, je crois, dans l'histoire de la Formule 1 que les pilotes sont unanimes sur un problème. Je crois que c'est motivé par le fait que ce problème est grave pour l'avenir des pilotes en Formule 1. Et je crois que maintenant, on est obligé d'aller jusqu'au bout.
Pironi opposed a new rule which the governing body and the constructors wished to impose, which bound the drivers to their teams. He recognised the danger and with Lauda incited his colleagues to resist. Such protest had never been seen before in motorsport.
Dans l'état actuel des choses, nous, on préférait qu'il y ait une course et des essais parce que c'est un compromis très facile à obtenir. On ne voit aucune raison pour ne pas l'obtenir, si ce n'est l'orgueil en premier lieu. Donc, je crois qu'il faut quand même passer outre vu les intérêts qui sont en jeu et surtout l'intérêt du grand public.
Pironi conducted the tough negotiations with representatives of the teams and governing body, showing remarkable self-control, and in the end, the authorities conceded defeat. Pironi was subsequently elected head of the Grand Prix Drivers' Association. Even so, Pironi was still seeking his first win for Ferrari at the start of his second season with the team, and this was a source of frustration. It perhaps explains his behaviour in the 1982 San Marino Grand Prix. It was a race that was unique because the British teams were in dispute with FISA at the time and boycotted it. Because of the thin entry, the Renault and Ferrari teams decided to stage a race. But when the French cars retired, only the local Ferraris were left to race for victory. Villeneuve had set fastest lap and was leading when Ferrari hung out a board saying slow a few laps from the end. The Canadian assumed that the team's positions would now stand to the checkered flag, but Pironi, who hadn't seen the board, attacked his teammate and surprised him on the last lap, snatching victory. Pironi claimed to have won in good faith, but Villeneuve was furious and hurt. He felt let down, betrayed. The story ended tragically. 2 weeks later, the pair, now no longer talking, were locked in a furious battle with one another to be fastest Ferrari in practice for the Belgian Grand Prix. Villeneuve went out to beat his teammate's time and tried to squeeze past Jochen Mass's march. The two cars collided. The career of the most popular of drivers was tragically ended, a victim of his own fiery temperament, his own bravery, and a character almost too rich. But this tragic story didn't end there. A few weeks later, Pironi's career was brought to a close by an accident at Hockenheim. Although he survived, he died later in a powerboat race. More calculating he may have been, but like Gilles, he flirted with danger. Fortunately, not all rivalries end that way. The duel between Piquet, the snake, and the uncomplicated Mansell aroused passions in England during the 1987 season, but made one smile rather than quake, even though it did eventually end in tears. But one has to admit that the difference between these two characters, teammates at Williams, seemed so characteristic as to be comic. Frank Williams, however, didn't always see the funny side.
We have a problem, as you've seen in many other teams from time to time, when you have two super competitive drivers who are both out there to win, and despite your best intentions, you can't give races at the cost of one driver to the other. It is next to impossible for one man in a competitive environment to say to another competitor, very sorry, but you're not going to win today, you must slow down. On the track, they were reasonably professional in their behavior to each other. Off the track, they were cold to each other, sometimes rude to each other. But generally speaking, I remember that they worked well, technically speaking. They covered ground for each other to save time.
Mansell, who wears his nationality on his sleeve, had preference in this very English of teams. Furthermore, in his pursuit of the title, the whole of Britain was behind their man with his almost obstinate courage. At the start of the season, Piquet suffered concussion in a serious accident, which affected him for much of the year. Outdriven by Mansell, the crafty Piquet sought other means to get the best of his rival. With cutting comments and scornful rumours, he undermined and destabilised his naive teammate, who was as ill prepared for such dirty tricks as he was capable of beating others on the track. And yet, against all odds, the psychological warfare worked. Although Mansell seemed to have shrugged off Piquet's destabilising, he then made two fundamental mistakes, which first of all spoiled and then totally ended his chances of winning the world title. At Spa, he collided with Senna soon after the start, trying to overtake when a little patience would have ultimately been rewarding, given the superiority of the Williams Honda over his rival's Lotus Renault. And then at Suzuka, when putting too much emphasis on gaining pole position, he crashed, damaging vertebrae in an accident which sent him to hospital and opened up the way for Piquet to claim his third title. A victory for luck over stupidity, the Brazilian champion unkindly called his year's campaign. The story of this rivalry began the rainy day of the 1984 Monaco Grand Prix. At half distance, worried by the deteriorating track conditions, clerk of the course Jackie Ickx decided to stop the race. Prost was in the lead at the time and obviously saw himself as the rightful winner, but only just. A Brazilian newcomer called Senna finished inches behind him after a stunning climb through the field. Another lap and he surely would have won. After proclaiming that victory had been snatched from him, this individualist, afraid of no one, had scarcely been hired by Lotus than he refused to have Warwick as teammate. Prost, right away, was annoyed.
Il y a quand même une chose qu'il faut dire, et c'est contre Senna, mais ça n'empêche que de toute façon, je l'aime beaucoup et que je trouve que c'est un super pilote, en tout cas un des meilleurs de sa génération. Mais si on veut encore une fois être objectif, il a quand même une voiture où il est tout seul dans son équipe. Et tant que, pour moi personnellement, je pourrais jamais considérer que Senna est le meilleur d'entre nous, et je serais capable de l'admettre un jour, tant qu'il n'acceptera pas d'être dans une équipe avec un pilote du même calibre que lui et avec la même voiture que lui.
An ironic comment, for in 1988, when Prost already had 2 titles to his credit, he was joined at McLaren by this same Senna, who, he confidently exclaimed, would now have to prove himself using equal equipment to an experienced world champion. Clearly, Prost, confident of himself, was preparing to give a good lesson to a driver whose reputation he considered overrated.
Ayrton has, for the first time in his career, the car able to be world champion. And he does not want to let his chance, going away. That's normal, and he's going to push hard.
What about you?
It's a little bit different.
So you're gonna let it go?
I have a little bit more pressure than, you put me more pressure.
The pressure mounted quickly, as we saw at Monaco, where Senna, having soundly dominated Prost, then committed a basic mistake and went off into the barrier when he had the race won. The manipulative talents of the Frenchman, who was familiar with all the nuances of his team, had seemed to have had its effect. But contrary to all expectations and showing a strength of character which he attributed to his faith, which was sometimes mocked, Senna came back with a vengeance. At Silverstone, where the Grand Prix started in a rain shower, it was Prost who cracked, refusing to become involved in a duel with his rival, whom he knew was superb in the wet and who would be utterly committed in the foul conditions. This was the turning point in the pair's first season together, the super-talented Brazilian, now nicknamed Magic, and the Frenchman, whose tactics and scientific approach earned him the nickname Professor.
He's gonna get more and more excited, the championship.
Is it possible to be equal in the championship?
No. Can only be one winner.
But at Estoril, the laughing stopped. Fed up with Prost's off-track politicking, Senna lost his cool and squeezed his teammate up against the pit wall, risking a big accident.
I was very surprised because normally, especially the first lap, when you do that with your teammates, you don't have a big problem like this, but I think we should solve the problem very quickly. It's no problem at all.
Ron Dennis, the McLaren director who was theoretically managing these 2 hotheads, scarcely seemed in control. At Suzuka, Senna virtually stalled at the start, and it seemed as though Prost had the title in his pocket. But thanks to a timely shower, the Rain Man charged through the field, past Prost, and headed for his first world title. It was already dramatic stuff, but we hadn't seen anything yet. In 1989, Prost had already decided to take his revenge, but Senna was just as determined to hang on to his crown. That was fairly normal. What wasn't normal was the hostility, even hatred, with which the pair regarded one another. The off-season had only temporarily stilled a conflict which was bubbling under the surface between these two champions, unfortunately blinded by their pride, their scorn, and their desire to humiliate one another. The spark that would relight the fire appeared at Imola. Prost and Senna had come to an agreement not to fight one another into the first corner. But Senna broke the agreement under the pretext that Prost had surprised him by braking earlier than he had expected.
It's a human side of the problem. It makes me very angry because I've always been very honest with my teammates. I've done everything I could for the team, and I look like, I don't know the name, but I felt very bad.
A psychological war now raged. Senna took the upper hand thanks to his easy relationship with the Honda mechanics, who so respected his test-driving capabilities. Prost, now the underdog, was on the defensive. Cleverly, however, the Frenchman now made the Japanese his target, accusing them publicly of not being fair to him, which put them in an embarrassing position.
Il est impossible de rivaliser de cette manière-là parce qu'il y a une trop grosse différence de moteur. Donc quand je suis derrière Ayrton, j'arrive pas à doubler. C'est absolument impossible. Alors que quand lui, il était derrière moi, alors que j'avais les pneus neufs, j'avais une meilleure adhérence. Bien entendu, il m'a passé très facilement dans la ligne droite, et ça c'est comme ça depuis le début de la saison.
Did Prost's tactics work? Senna's luck began to fail, and the two drivers found themselves once again neck and neck at Suzuka. Prost made the better start, but Senna wasn't far behind. But when he decided to make his move, they collided at the chicane. If neither of them won, then Prost would be world champion. Senna had to win to keep his title. When the Frenchman abandoned his car, basically not unhappy with the outcome of the confrontation, the Brazilian was able to restart and won the race. After the race, however, he would be disqualified, given a hefty fine, and even suspended for his driving during the incident. The governing body in this instance demonstrated a worrying lack of composure.
I never caused the accident in Suzuka. It was never my responsibility, and that you should see in a video, not by my own words. But I just say that because I keep hearing here or there that I only drive one way, it's the only way I know, and I don't care if I cause an accident, things like this. This is not correct. The way the whole affair has been treated is like I have total responsibility for everything that took place there. I was blamed for everything, and I was penalized for everything. I was treated like a criminal. What we see today is a truly manipulation of the '89 championship.
Manipulation. Senna uttered the word which earned him the governing body's wrath, even though he had ended up by winning this crucial Japanese Grand Prix. The Brazilian was sure that Prost and FISA president Jean-Marie Balestre had been pulling strings so that the title would eventually return to France. And so, 1 year later exactly, while Prost had left McLaren for Ferrari, the two rivals found themselves for the third consecutive time at the start of a Japanese Grand Prix with everything to play for, this time the 1990 world title. It was an extraordinary coincidence, yet one which certainly livened up the struggle, but also highlighted their superiority, reducing the rest to also-rans. And the scenario that everyone feared turned out exactly as the cynics predicted. This time it was Senna, who had nothing to lose in an accident and was starting behind Prost, who had proved his potential in qualifying. As one can see, Prost opened the door for a second before taking the line again, but Senna saw his chance and he went for it. It was an optimistic manoeuvre, but the Brazilian was unrestrained. He had decided to take his revenge for what he considered to be his unjust treatment the previous year, and he wanted to punish Prost. An eye for an eye. Not very Christian for a man who swears by his faith, but there must be a moral there somewhere.